If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. Seems every week I get a number of people telling me that they were unsubscribed without their permission. And of course, be sure to give the video a like. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, CNN, along with a number of other white media outlets, are slowly but surely having to pivot to admit to the hard, cold reality of Biden and Kamala's real dilemma. You see, the road to the White House, at least for the left arm of white supremacy, runs directly through the black community. And the black bootlicks and their boule sorority, fraternity clowns, these guys have not been able to move the needle. The power of being able to mobilize and direct that black vote, it's not with the usual suspects, the tools who white supremacy created for the sake of misleading you and me. What's happened is there is a quantum shift in the internal politics of the black polity. And CNN, this is the second time in as many weeks that they've had to admit to this truth. Black voters will tell us if Biden had a successful convention. Well, you won't have to wait very long. We've been telling you all this week that Biden's little coming out party has been a complete and thorough flop. So CNN, you've gotten your answer and you didn't have to wait for it. You don't have to wait to see if you can bring out some of your hand-picked, bought and paid for Negroes who'll say, oh, it was wonderful, the most glorious thing we've ever seen. Oh, Biden's got this one wrapped up. Oh, Trump, he might as well go ahead and start packing his bags now. He's done. See, that's what the white media will try to do. They'll try to bring out the Bakari sellouts. And they'll try to bring out the Karine Stud-Pierres, and they'll try to bring out the rest of the fakers, frauds, phonies, fools, sellouts, suck-ups, and simps to try to run interference and claim that the DNC convention has captured the hearts and minds of black people. Oh, Joe Biden's going to have a bigger, better black turnout than Barack Obama did, except even CNN already knows that cannot possibly happen. In a video essay from August 2nd, I posted for you how CNN, from the same writer no less, had written the story that Joe Biden's advantage over Trump with black voters is currently smaller than Hillary Clinton's was. That was exactly a month ago when that was written. And now here we are a month later after the DNC convention. Biden's supposed to have a big bump with black voters, but you wouldn't know it, especially if you look with young black voters. And that is the trend that the white media sees. Oh yeah, just let CNN tell it to you. Quote, although black voters propelled Biden to victory in the primary, his lead with them continues to be noticeably smaller than Clinton's edge at the end of the 2016 campaign. That's what CNN is writing, while they're busy on air broadcast telling everybody, oh, Trump, he's hemorrhaging support, Biden is rising, and Kamala's taking him to new heights. What they're saying on their website is, you know what, we can already see the stress fractures here. We can already tell that Biden's position, especially with black voters, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And you know why that is? It's because there happens to be a black media out here beating the drum, telling the truth about Biden, making it clear that black folks are not turning out just because you say that they should. Now, the writer of this piece, who was the same guy who wrote the piece from a month ago, July 21st, saying that Biden's lead with black voters is smaller than Hillary's was at the same time of the election, he goes on to write that Biden is ahead among black registered voters by 67 points on average and 71 points in the median of these polls. That's a sizable advantage. Then he goes on to write, it's actually slightly less, though, than the 75-point lead he had with black registered voters when I looked at the average of polls taken in late May through mid-July. While we can't be sure that Biden's actually doing worse with black voters than he had previously, well, let me go ahead and tell the writer, the black media, the black grassroots, we can go ahead and certify that he's doing worse. But to continue, given sample size restrictions, it's quite clear he isn't doing better than he was earlier in the summer. As far as I can tell, Biden's lead with black voters is currently at one of its lowest levels of the 2020 campaign. More interestingly, his support among black voters is quite clearly smaller than Clinton's 79-point margin in the final registered voter polls of 2016. Say, if Hillary Clinton had more black support than Joe Biden did at this time 4 years ago, and Hillary lost the election, does that mean that Joe Biden, with less support than Hillary, is going to win the election? I mean, if all things remain equal, of course. Point that I'm trying to make, family, is no matter what it is that the left arm of white supremacy tries to put forward, they're putting up this happy, brave front. At the end of the day, when they look at the numbers make it very clear Joe Biden is hemorrhaging black support left, right, and center. Okay? As the CNN article goes on to write, when I, talking about the writer, aggregated across CNN polls this year, Biden was dominating with black voters age 50 and older. He led them by about 85 points. Biden's margin was only about 65 points among black voters under the age of 50. And here's one of the most important parts of this article. The sample sizes are large enough that we can feel pretty certain that there's an age divide in black voter preference. There it is. This is something about young black voters. Apparently, young black voters ain't doing what the black baby boomers, the 65 to dead demo have done, or even the 50 to dead demo have done. Those folks under 50, in fact, this is about more than the under 30s. This is the under 50s. This is solidly Generation X here. And the millennials, with a few post-millennials thrown in for good measure. But this is what we're talking about here. The white media is looking at this and going, there seems to be a generation gap going on here. You're damn right. And it's the black media that has been driving the wedge to make sure that we separate ourselves from the failed policies and behaviors of the past. We ain't doing what these old graybeards did. They did nothing but lay down for white supremacy, and they ain't got nothing to show for it but a bunch of knots on their heads, an empty bank account, and a lot of them in an early grave. Now, as the writer goes on to note, 4 years ago, there was no such age gap in the pre-election polling. He's talking about 2016. Trump basically was stuck at 5% or slightly less, no matter the age group of black voters. That is, Trump's doing no better than 4 years ago among black voters. Still, Biden's problems with younger black voters does make some sense in the context of history. We saw it throughout the primary season. Biden would routinely lose black voters under the age of 30 to Bernie the Bigot Sanders, while crushing him among black voters 65 years and older. Now, this is just an argument about which one of them is going to have the honor of losing in November. That's basically all that means. But you guys understand what it is that these guys are, CNN is basically not trying to come quite up the middle about. It's a matter of Joe Biden's not doing anywhere near so well with black voters as he or the white media would like for you and I to believe that he's doing. And why is that? What's different now than 4 years ago? Now, CNN, they ain't really giving you the whole skinny because the problem began well before 2016. But as Dr. John Henrik Clarke pointed out, revolts and revolutions take on average 10 to 20 years to gain momentum. They need time to build momentum. And if you consider this, that the black media had begun its work somewhere around that you guys are aware of, because actually a lot of us have been doing this out here before YouTube and in many cases before social media. But as far as you guys hearing about us, the new voices of black media, that all began circa 2007. Okay, fast forward 10 years. Or rather 9 years, I should say, you get to 2016. That's when people start noticing, hey, there's something going on here. That's what happens when you're consistent. All the building, all of the aggregating, the constant reaching out, consistently keeping up the message over a decade. Hard at work. Less than 10 years later, what was happening was we were dampening the support for major party candidates. That's the reason why it was so important to me to begin the work of exposing Kamala Harris in 2017. The moment that this woman was talking about going for the Senate, I was like, whoa, we need to start a drumbeat now. Because the white media, you can already tell that they were grooming her to be the heir apparent to Barack Obama. It was pathetically obvious what they were doing. So I decided, well, I better make sure that my people know what the hell the white media is trying to pull. Let's make sure that I define Kamala Harris, and I'm going to go ahead and take care of introducing Kamala Harris to the black media at large. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that black folks outside California know exactly who and what she is. Before the New York Times finally pulled up the rear, Professor Black Truth was already banging the drum. And the white media is admitting to this. 4 years ago, as far as they were concerned, there wasn't this huge gap 4 years ago. Well, gee, now if that happens to be the case, if there was no such age gap in pre-election polling in 2016, then how do you explain the fact that Hillary Clinton lost? This is history repeating itself, only it's more pronounced this time around. Oh, there's a few percentage points between Hillary and Biden, 75 versus 79. Yeah, but the thing about it is Hillary still lost. And who was leading the charge to make it very clear? She's going to be held accountable for everything that she did when she was first lady, amening Bill Clinton's every anti-black act, and then what she didn't do when she became senator and later Secretary of State. Thinking that she was going to coast to the White House with all of these graybeards and a few whacked out black feminists for good measure, and they saw that didn't work. It's a brand new day. Oh, they don't have to admit to it. These guys are terrified of anything that they don't control, and they damn sure don't control the black media. But it's not a matter of whether or not you happen to be afraid of it or not. You can put up a brave front all you want. You're still going to get run over. That's all there is to it. You don't have to admit to it. That doesn't make us go away. So CNN can knock it off with all this play acting that, black voters will tell us if Biden had a successful convention. Man, the jury was already in before the convention even started. They already knew exactly what the verdict was before the first pathetic video streamed endorsement came in. We already rendered our verdict on this one. The white media is simply in denial because they don't have the ability to reverse this. They see who's got the momentum, and it's not them. They understand exactly what the hell is going on. Now, Joe Biden can do one pathetic stunt after the next if he wants. It doesn't change the fact that young black voters, who, by the way, are the ones who are going to define the future position, if any, of the left arm of white supremacy. This is a quantum shift, not merely for the black vote, but for American politics. Who the hell are the Democrats going to go to get into the White House? Trying to put together these non-black voter coalitions. We're going to put together this Frankenstein monster of a constituency. We're going to have some LGBTs and some immigrants, and we're going to have a few intersectionalists and some swirlers and some black feminists in the shea butter Twitter crowd. And somewhere along the line, these guys are going to hopefully hand us a victory. We're not sure where, but hopefully there'll be a victory in there somewhere. Okay, how's that been working so far? Did it work for Kamala Harris? If anybody should have been able to have that black vote locked up, it should have been Kamala Harris, but it hasn't worked like that, and because it cannot work like that. It just can't. We are facing American politics with something that they thought would never happen, and that is black people making it clear we're going to put black on the ballot, and you ain't getting away with no lip service. And you're not using any weasel words. You're not going to shoehorn minorities or people of color or some other term that's meant to say everyone except for black people. No, you're going to say black. And if you don't, well, then the country better get used to one-party rule. Because as black voters, we're not choosing the lesser of two evils anymore. We're done with that zero-sum game. We're done with being played for suckers. The old, you got to choose the lesser of two evils. No, I don't have to choose evil at all. If black empowerment is not on the ballot, then I ain't showing up. And this is young black people doing this. This ain't a bunch of retirees and graybeards and some bitter dead-enders from the black baby boomers. This happens to be the young black folks. Under 30s, hell, even under 50s. That's what's happening here. This is going to be the future of American politics. That's what nobody wants to have to say. Nobody wants to have to say that what the black community is doing right now, what the black grassroots has affected, what the black media has promoted, this is going to be the future of American politics. This is going to be the new normal. Welcome to the way things are going to be from here on in. Nobody wants to say that. Instead, what they want to say is, let's talk about immigrants and LGBTs and feminists, blah, blah, blah. But they don't want to say that when it comes to black people, our interest being part of American policy, being at the forefront of American policy, this is going to be the new normal. And it's the young black folks pushing this. So you're going to be dealing with this for the next 50 years. Nobody wants to have to say that because the changes to the racial status quo in America are simply too terrifying for the dominant society to even contemplate that thought. So the white media doesn't even dare to say it. Oh, they'll sit there and say, well, Joe Biden's failing with young black voters and he's in trouble, but they don't sit there and say, you know what, if this is what the young black voters are doing, and looking at what we're seeing in the streets and seeing online, and the fact that there's clearly, you got billboards going up across the nation, the black bootlick class can't even keep up, they're just falling behind. Clearly, young black people are on a tear about this. And this is going to define American politics for the next 2 or 3 generations. Nobody wants to have to say those words because the idea of having to reckon with a black agenda, that's absolutely the antithesis of white supremacy. So no, these guys are a bunch of kooks and weirdos. Or better yet, oh, don't even go that far. Let's just not talk about it at all. Let's just hide our heads in the sand. Hey, okay, that's fine. You can go ahead and hide your heads in the sand. That'll make it that much easier for the B1 to kick you in your raggedy behinds. Now, just a few days ago, Time magazine also had a similar article, very much like the one about Joe Biden. Black voters under 30 could decide Joe Biden's fate by sitting the election out. This is what they're saying in the middle of the DNC convention. On the 19th, by the way, for those of you who weren't paying attention, that was on Wednesday. Before the DNC convention was even over, you had Time magazine, no less, part of the legacy white media, saying that black voters under 30 could decide Joe Biden's fate by sitting the election out. See, what's happening is they're having to pivot because what's happening is that they know that Cardi B and that Killer Mike, or Sucker Mike as I like to call them, or any of these other Negroes, hip hoppers and athletes and actors, you know, the high profile bootlicks who the white media thinks, okay, we couldn't get you with the usual suspects, so we'll use some of the unusual ones. These guys are clearly not having an impact on the young black voters. They're not being led around by the nose by some clown just because he has a rap album. They're not listening to these guys. So who are they listening to? Oh, they're listening to those angry black voices on the internet. You know, the ones who keep telling the truth, who keep speaking truth to power. That's who they're listening to. So Time magazine with their little piece, basically I'll spare you a lot of what it was that they wrote. The most important thing that they actually put in there came from, yet again, our friends over at American University. I told you about them before. But the folks at American University said that young African Americans don't have confidence that the system will or can function in a way that will advantage their lives. Yeah, you want to know why that is? No, they don't actually talk to the young black folks. They don't talk to the black grassroots. Instead, you got a bunch of these Ivy League operators of the system, just individuals who have the most to gain by propping up this sick, racist scam calling itself a society. Instead, they're going to go ahead and give the soft chew, cotton candy version of the truth, something that won't terrify the white public too much if they read it. But you're doggone right. Young black people have no confidence that the system is going to function in a way that will advantage our lives because we recognize this system is not broken. It's not that there's something wrong with the system. We fully realize the system is operating exactly the way that it's supposed to. And that's the problem. The problem isn't that there's something wrong with the system. The problem is the system's operating exactly how it's supposed to. What we're seeing is actually right. Not right in the sense of good, but right in the sense of, yeah, this is actually accurate. This is not an accident. This is not a mistake. It's not that something went wrong. As the timepiece says, they have no evidence or little evidence that the system will improve their lives. When they engage with the system, more often than not, it is adverse. In some ways, it is destructive and life-threatening to them. Well, that's sprinkling sugar on crap. In most, if not all ways, engaging with the system is destructive and life-threatening. There, I fixed that sentence for you, stupid. As a result of that, they have little inclination to engage with that system. This is what's coming from the white Ivy Leaguers. And they're talking about black kids under the age of 30. Young black people under the age of 30 is who they're talking about. Now, as Time magazine decides to sum it up, put another way, young black voters opt out of a system they see is rigged, if not openly hostile. Joe Biden, who has been in national politics for decades, is the embodiment of that system. Now, that's about the only halfway accurate thing that they wrote. Yeah, you got these young black people. They clearly understand that Joe Biden is the embodiment of the system, and so is Kamala Harris. That needs to be said, too. So you got the white media. They're trying to figure out some way to make it where Kamala Harris can be rehabilitated. And the last excerpt from this Time piece that I'm going to focus on here, this is where the white media tries to figure out how to sprinkle some sugar on the lies. They decide that they're going to completely misrepresent what it is that the young black voters are demanding. Because now that they've pointed out that, okay, there's obviously a huge problem when it comes to black voters under the age of 30, they've decided that they're not going to be looking to the ballot box. They've decided that the old pattern of, oh, here's the party that claims to be on our side, so we're going to vote for them. No, we're voting for whomever brings us our tangibles. And since nobody's putting tangibles on the ballot, we ain't going to the polls. Well, what Time magazine does, now that they've laid out at least the idea that there's a huge disconnect when it comes to black voters under the age of 30, and clearly they are absolutely at war with this system. Well, what is it that they want? Now, here's where the white media decides to tell a lie. So it's a matter of, okay, we're not going to actually say anything about reparations or punishing the police. Instead, what we're going to be saying is something else. And here's what they write. Focus groups indicate a few reasons for the indifference to Biden among younger black voters. For one, younger voters feel Democrats have taken their support for granted, as evidenced when Biden jokingly said anyone who would vote for Trump ain't black. These younger voters have less of an affinity with the Democratic Party that worked to guarantee older generations' rights, which are now seen as obvious. The history-making Barack Obama-Joe Biden ticket of 2008 is old news for these younger voters. And here it comes. There's a quiet conversation among some young black voters on issues of same-sex marriage and abortion rights. Now, family, we've been out here summers and winters, the black media, the B1 Brigade, the black grassroots. We've been talking about a lot of things. Who the hell's been talking about same-sex marriage or abortion rights? What that lets you know is this is where that whole human rights campaign thing I told you about, that LGBT group that uses a front Negro to be their mouthpiece, that's where they come in. The idea is supposed to be, well, what are black voters concerned about? They're concerned about reparations. No, they're not really concerned about that. Well, they're concerned about punishing the police so that they can walk the streets safely. No, they're not really concerned about that. Well, what is it that young black voters want according to the white media? They're concerned about LGBT and abortion rights. No, the LGBT community is concerned about same-sex marriage, which, by the way, last time I checked is already legal, so what's the concern? And it's the feminists, mostly white feminists, who are concerned about abortion rights. Young black voters are not out there talking about gay people getting married or what have you. That's already a settled point of law, so what the hell are they rambling about? And abortion rights, ain't nobody talking about that. This is the age of tangibles. But this is the white media trying to set up the D. Ray McKessons and the human rights campaigns and the Corrine Stud-Pierres and others, trying to set them up, the LGBT spokespeople, who they can put in front of the cameras and say, well, you see, these young black voters, they're very much concerned about LGBTQ rights because there's a lot of black trans and a lot of black feminists and there's a lot of black LGBTs. And that being the case, that's what they're concerned about. And the Democrats are leaving this behind. And if you mention that, that's how you engage with them. That's what they're concerned about. And they're concerned about abortion rights. Yeah, because Planned Parenthood has been such a blessing to the black community, hasn't it? That's how you know this. The white media can't even be slick enough to come up with some wording that doesn't show how ridiculous their lie is. They can't even come up with a lie that doesn't clearly make you look and just roll your eyes up into your head so deep that your eyes threaten never to come down again. They can't even figure out how to lie without it sounding absolutely asinine. But this is what the white media is trying to do. They're trying to set up bringing in some of their black LGBT spokespeople. That's the some young black voters they're talking about, because keep in mind, earlier on in the piece, they were talking about black non-voters. Now here we are back at young black voters again. There's a quiet conversation. Yeah, it's real quiet. That's because nobody can hear it, because you can't hear what ain't there. But this is the white media attempting to dictate to you what it is you ought to think, attempting to dictate to you how it is you ought to behave. Because Joe Biden has plenty to say about LGBT rights, and he's got plenty to say about abortion rights, but he has nothing to say about black people's human rights. He's been quiet on that. And so is his running mate, Kamala Harris. Because the truth of the matter is, Joe Biden, he's just another old white guy, and they can go ahead and go to their narrative of, oh, well, you know, you put an old white guy on the ballot, and truth be told, America couldn't decide between the old crusty white guy or the loudmouth flamboyant old white guy, so the loud white man with the old elderly white man with the loud mouth won the argument. That's what they would like to say. But no, how do you explain Kamala Harris, though? See, the white media, they are every much as beholden to the white establishment as any other apparatus of white supremacy. They have to be able to prove that they can shape reality. And part of shaping reality is dictating to black people in particular, get back on that electoral treadmill. You got this woman of color on the ballot, and we told you that she's part black. So you're supposed to jump right on there. You're supposed to be champing at the bit. You're supposed to be just eager to vote because we told you so. But that hasn't been what's happening. Now, next, the Time article goes on to write, and if they, talking about young black voters, maintain those views, black non-voters under the age of 30 may well decide whether Trump wins a second term this fall. It's why the American university scholars are continuing their research with an eye on this specific subset. See, they're not just looking at black voters. They're looking at black voters under the age of 30. As I've always told you, whether it's Richard Spencer or American University, when it comes to white supremacy and its apparatuses and its operators, they look at the trend. They want to see where's the trend going, because that horizon's going to be right in front of us in a minute. They know that. So when they start seeing a trend forming, they understand they have to be ultra hypersensitive to anything that looks like it might change the status quo. Because white supremacy is a fraud, it's a lie. And because of the fact that they know that it's so fragile it could fall over with the first breeze, well, you got to make sure that there's going to be no breezes at all. And that's the reason why they got to stay on top of us. But Time magazine lays it out. Young black voters are opting out of a system that they see as rigged. And if they maintain those views, black non-voters under the age of 30. Now look at the phrasing they use. Black non-voters. They didn't even say black voters. At the beginning of the sentence, they said young black voters opt out of a system they see as rigged. Then, a mere 2 sentences later, they say, and if they maintain those views, black non-voters under the age of 30, blah, blah, blah. So we went from black voters to black non-voters. So for all you Negroes out there who it's taken you this damn long to understand something, I figured now that the white media's gone ahead and said it, that black people who decide that they are making a point by not voting. It's one thing to be sitting at home because you don't vote and you don't get off your couch and you don't work and you ain't working for black empowerment. That's one thing. You are irrelevant. But if you're a black person who's about making sure that you've got your resources and you are politically aware and you are politically engaged, though not electorally engaged, that's different. What that means is you're the kind of black person who, as far as you're concerned, you're determined to see a change in your life. You're not going to be spending the rest of your days couch surfing. But you're looking to go in that ballot box is clearly not the way to bring about the changes that I need. Since this time last year, when I began this latest Professor Black Truth channel, I pointed out to you that no less than Ronald Racist Reagan, back in the 1970s, when he had his first flop trying to call himself putting his hat into the presidential ring, one of the things he was pointing out was he didn't like how the African nations had voted when it came time to vote on Taiwan and its membership in the UN. And one of the things that Reagan said was the United States needs to withdraw from voting in the UN, not withdraw from acting on the international stage. We're still going to have our influence. But to make it very clear, we see the UN as being illegitimate. And by withdrawing from voting, what you're doing is just sending a message that this organization is illegitimate. You see, that's the value of a strategic withdrawal from a system, a strategic non-involvement with a system that you are clearly letting everyone know, I'm not engaging with this system because this system happens to be a white supremacist con game and I'm not playing along with it. That's the power of it. You're sending a message. When you have somebody who just sits on the couch and they don't give a damn about anything to begin with, now that person not voting is worthless, but nobody cares about that person anyway. It's the folks who used to vote who stopped, or the young ones who make it clear we're determined to see changes in the society, but we are not going to waste our time. It's the people who are here, the B1, the black grassroots. That's the ones who it becomes dangerous when those people say that we are opting out of the system. And the white media talks about that. They're making it very clear. The black non-voters under the age of 30 are going to have an impact. Now, finally, well, it's not the end of the piece, but it's the last thing that I'm going to remark on from this article, all of which is why Biden's selection of Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate was politically sound. As the first black woman on a national ticket and the first Asian American too, all eyes will be on Harris when she takes the virtual stage for the DNC convention, blah, 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 blah. Of course, they do the usual sloppy kiss to her. Her rollout last week was about as flawless as one could be during a pandemic. And, yeah, of course, you got to burnish Kamala Harris's laurels because that's what this is about. Kamala Harris represents something very different within the political landscape and within this presidential election than Joe Biden does. Biden represents an old white guy who was friends with segregationists, but otherwise, this guy is basically somebody who they're looking and saying, well, we're not going to galvanize black people with this old white man anymore. And Kamala Harris, on the other hand, because of the fact that she has been a career enabler and promoter of the injustice system, if you can get black people to go from hating someone like this and refusing to vote for them to holding their nose and going, well, we know how many black people she put in prison. We know how many black people that she's tried to have executed wrongly, how many innocent black people she's tried to have killed. And we know how she refused to do anything about police killings of black people. But we're going to hold our nose and vote for her anyway. If that happens, then as far as they're concerned, everything that the black media's been saying, the black agenda, all the rest of that stuff, obviously, it's gone. It's completely and thoroughly nullified. It is null and void. There is nothing to it. It's disintegrated. And we get to go back to the old status quo. That's the importance of having Kamala Harris out there. That's what her involvement is meant to cement. It would be a clear referendum, a refutation of what the black grassroots has been doing since 2016, at least. Thank you, CNN. What began that the white media was at least willing to admit to, because they saw the stress fractures forming years earlier. But at least they were willing to admit, okay, in 2016, it was obvious that things were a little bit wobbly. Not as wobbly as today, but, maybe it could have been better. Who knows? But that's why they're trying to talk around the issue. Because the moment that they admit to it, they have to admit, you know what? These black demands are not going to be so easily ignored this time. These black demands have been persistent and consistent. And all of this talking around it, and we're going to try to change the subject and bring somebody else out here, and let's talk about something else, or we're going to use weasel words and pretend as if we addressed the issue when we didn't. That's not going to take. It's not going to work. And this new generation of black folks, they're not going for it. Oh, you're not going to say the word reparations and then immediately turn around and stop saying it. You ain't heard the word reparations for these clowns in a few months now, have you? Now, what does that tell you? Oh, but you have heard, if you can't make up your mind whether to vote for me or not, then you ain't black. You have heard that. You've seen black sock puppets for the white media like Agent Duvernay saying, yeah, I heard what you said. Kamala didn't do this and Kamala didn't do that. I know, I hear you, and I don't care. And more recently, you had Paul Butler, a fellow former prosecutor like Kamala Harris, calling himself, wagging his finger and lecturing black men that if you don't vote for Kamala Harris, it's because you're all sexist. You see, we've heard that, but we haven't heard anyone saying reparations. We haven't heard anyone saying tangibles. We haven't heard anyone saying punish the police and punish them hard. That hasn't been part of the rhetoric coming from Biden, Kamala, or their black sock puppet stooges. And what does that tell you? What that tells you is there's a program at work here. The memo's gone out. Just like with that DNC memo that went out after Black Lives Matter first started, where they said, do not promise to do anything. Make no promises. You can be as phony sympathetic as you want, but do not make any promises. Well, clearly another memo has gone out. Do not mention the police. Never mention the police. You can't mention reparations and can't mention the police. We're trying to pivot away from that. We're trying to veer people away from that. We're trying to hype up Kamala, and if we can get the hype train going at something resembling half speed, then hopefully some Negroes will be dumb enough and fall for it, because that's what the goal here is now. Can they fracture the solidarity of this black grassroots and what it is that we represent? Because obviously a lot of black folks, a lot of the vote or die crowd, Punk Daddy and his ilk, they've heard what we've said. They've tried to replicate what we've said. By the way, you haven't heard reparations come from him either, have you? Ain't heard him talking about punishing the police now, have you? That's what they're scared of. They're scared of the impact that we're going to have. We have already forced them to have to reckon with reparations. They tried to redefine it. Bernie Sanders tried to deny it and got punished for it. Now what they're hoping to do is they're hoping to slink by if they just don't say anything. Well, we're not going to let them do that. And this is just the beginning. You're going to have to get comfortable having things that are advantageous for black people as part of the regular lexicon of American public policy. We are forcing and elbowing our way into the discussion. We're not asking. We're taking. Power is not given, it is taking. And that's what we are. We're taking it. Oh, but what about 4 more years of the Orange Man? Well, 4 more years of him don't seem to be any different than 4 years of Biden and Kamala. Trump's not promising us anything, and neither is Biden and Kamala. So that being the case, that's a distinction without a difference. You're not going to be scaring these young black folks, the under 50s. You're not going to be scaring them to the polls with the prospect of Donald Trump's uncivil tongue. That's not going to be enough to scare us to the polls. Fear is not going to get us to the polls. Tangibles will do it. Now, tangibles will get us to the polls. Punishing the police will get us to the polls. In other words, forcing the system to do things that it was not designed to do. That'll get us to the polls. When it comes time for you to step into the arena of power and take what's yours, there's not going to be any opinion polls conducted. You're not going to be asking how other people feel about it. They can feel however they want. Power is not inclined to be listening to a bunch of gripes and whining, especially from those who have profited from your deprivation and suffering. And you need to get comfortable with that idea. We're not caring about what anybody thinks of us having what is ours. You think that putting on a rerun of Eye on the Prize, or because the white media pretends that they're going to say something laudatory about some civil rights retread, or, oh, look at the struggle, you know, they put on the nice music and such. Oh, you see, we approve of this. Isn't this just so glorious? Well, for whatever glory there was in the civil rights movement, the white media had nothing to do with that. The valor and the honor, and there was some valor and honor in the civil rights movement, unfortunately, is not the stuff that the white media teaches you about. But what was meritorious and worthy about the civil rights movement had absolutely nothing to do with consensus building and everything to do with black people, the former slaves of this country, having what is ours, getting back what was stolen from us. That's what's worthy about it. That's what's important about it. And you're not going to be trotting out any hand-picked puppets to get us off of that. Andrew Gillum, I can only imagine what bathhouse he crawled out of. Hopefully he was halfway sober this time. He's not going to change our minds. Barack Obama, who happens to be absolutely verboten among black circles, he's not changing anything. Oh, he may make the LGBT crowd's hearts go pitter-pat, but he ain't got a damn thing to say to the black grassroots. Those young black folks, they ain't trying to hear from him. Not trying to hear from him at all. So there is indeed a reckoning going on. The black grassroots, we are now beginning to see the first green shoots, the first green buds of the harvest that we've planted. This is just the beginning, folks, of a very long journey. Please don't go celebrating too soon. But the attempts to bring out the Stacey Abrams and the Andrew Gillums and the Kamala Harrises is falling flat. And it's not being led by the older black crowd. It ain't being led by the 65 to dead demo or even the 50 to dead demo. This is the 50 and under. And speaking of Stacey Abrams, a few months ago, back in May, Joe Biden chose to go to Brown Chapel AME Church. And what a surprise! Stacey Abrams, who is supposed to be a Georgia politician, by the way, she just happened to be in Alabama on that exact same day in the exact same place too. Hey, who would have thought? A small world, ain't it? By the way, if the name Brown Chapel AME Church sounds familiar to you, it should. That's the exact same church where Michael Bloomberg's presidential dreams died when the black congregation stood up and turned their backs on him in the middle of his speech. Now, the pastor of Brown Chapel, this is a boot-licking, moist piece of crap. Any of my brigadiers who are in that area, if you go to that church, I don't know what the hell's wrong with you. That clown who's supposed to be the pastor of Brown Chapel AME, he wears his treason as a badge of honor. He gives a doggone platform to any anti-black racist, at least on the left, who wants to show up and try to see if they can peddle their libelous wares. They're going to come in and try to tell black folks all sorts of falsehoods and lies, and he tries to lend the good offices of God himself to these white supremacist lies, these white supremacist attempts to deceive the black masses. That bastard ought to be ashamed of himself, but you gotta have shame in order to be ashamed. He's one of those pathetic, buck-dancing Negroes who sees his church as some sort of social club. He's not a pastor, he's a socialite. His church is the place to see and be seen, and he can always be counted on to smile ear to ear whenever the white supremacists strut in. Twice as big if there's cameras. Some fool skinning and grinning, that's how you lead a people to genocide. The most efficient way to carry out a genocide is to get those who are being targeted to think that they're not going to be killed. Get them to think that it's business as usual. Get them to sit on their hands so you bring in one of their own. And he'll smile wide and say, why, these guys with the long knives and the guns and such, please don't be worried about them, especially this Mike Bloomberg guy who said he wanted that more black people need to be stopped and frisked and locked up. Please don't be worried about him. And Joe Biden, who wrote the 94 crime bill and who also co-signed and co-sponsored the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act and the 84 crime omnibus and a bunch of other things. This guy who has been using his position as a senator, as a cudgel, as a mace, as a cat o' nine tails to beat black people bloody and to death, don't be worried about him either. You know, he has something he wants to say. Because after all the good he's done for the black community, locking black folks up, putting a $13 billion bounty on black people's heads, that's how much Joe Biden wrote into the 94 crime bill to incentivize the 50 states to change their laws so that they would be as harsh and draconian as the ones that he wrote at the federal level. He put a $13 billion bounty on black folks' heads. Please let him come in. Please listen to what he has to say because he's done so much good for black folks so far. This is how you lead people to genocide. Didn't I warn you about the Judas goat? Now, for those of you who forgot, I better go ahead and tell you about that Judas goat again. Usually whenever you got yourself some sort of ranch and you're raising sheep and goats for slaughter, what you do is you take one of the goats in particular and you feed him extra well. You don't treat him like the others. Because you're making a pet out of this one. The rest of them, you don't give a dang what they do. But it's this one goat in particular. You want to make sure he gets his fur brushed and make sure that he eats good, and you pat him on the head and you scratch him behind the ears. You're being really nice to him because you're making a pet out of him. Kind of like a pet Negro. And you're training this goat to do what you say. He's going to obey your orders because, you guys are really friendly like that. And then when it comes time for the sheep to go to the slaughterhouse, because you got to go ahead and make some money, what you do is you lower the ramp into the sheep's pen so that the animals can go up the ramp and into the slaughterhouse. But the problem with sheep is they are notoriously hard to herd. They are notoriously hard to corral. Very, very difficult to get sheep to follow instructions. So what you do is you get one of their own who's been trained. You get that goat to go up the ramp on command. And the other goats look and say, hey, that's Bob over there. Or rather, I should say, that's Kamala. That's Andrew Gillum. That's Stacey Abrams. Well, you see, they've been treating old Stacy over there real nice, treating her real nice. They don't have her being ignored or otherwise hit upside the head like the rest of us. And look, she's going up that ramp. Well, I don't know what's there, but we might as well follow too. And that's why they call it the Judas goat, because that's the goat who betrays the others. Oh, they think that they're going to be enjoying the lifestyle that they saw Stacy or Andrew or whomever enjoying. What they don't realize is, nope, this is the last roundup for all of you. Stacy / Andrew / Kamala, whomever included. All of you guys are going to the exact same place. And it's not going to be some nice grazing farm. It's going to be somebody's dinner plate. That's what's going on with the pastor of Brown Chapel AME. See, white power propped up these buck-dancing, boot-licking, backstabbing traitors like this Pastor Porkchop to be their buffer class. White supremacy believes in redundancy. And as Neely Fuller said, it believes in taking both sides of the argument. If you don't go for Hillary Clinton's lies, well, maybe you'll go for Michael Bloomberg. And if you don't go for his, maybe you go for Joe Biden. Because you got the pastor here saying, I'm not necessarily saying vote for Biden, but I am saying listen to what he has to say. Yeah, don't bother thinking, just do what pastor tells you. Dr. John Henrik Clarke said that you should use religion to free yourself. But you got to be careful, family. Otherwise, you'll immediately find yourself listening to one of these pulpit pimps white supremacy has put in place to mislead you. This is when you can clearly see the left arm of white supremacy is out of ideas. We haven't been going for the okie doke, and our persistence is showing results. Kamala Harris hasn't been pushing her asinine Lift Act since we ran her out the paint in the primaries. She's not saying it now. So what does that tell you about her devotion to making sure that black people get something? Shouldn't she be leading with that Lift Act and saying, Joe Biden's heard the Lift Act and this is going to be a policy. This is going to be one of the planks of our platform. They ain't even saying nothing about that. That's how you know if they're serious about something. See, anytime you have some politician telling you about the brilliant legislation that they're proposing, see if they go on a jihad to get it passed, or if they only mention it whenever they're standing in front of some black folks and they're desperate to give you some phony reason to vote for them. Because the Lift Act was a nothing burger, a feeble bit of rhetoric meant to give her something to say when black people invariably ask, what are you going to do for us? But now that she figures that she's got this VP nomination and the white media's told them, oh, he spent the last 4 years telling people that Donald Trump's a clown and giving him some unsavory headlines. And because of that, why, they'll be just so desperate to vote for him, you don't have to promise them anything. Just promise that you're going to take office and all they have to, that's more than enough reason for them to vote for you. Just go ahead and say you're going to take office and that's all they need to know. You don't have to promise them anything. In fact, you shouldn't. Let me tell you something. The old days of talking us to death and talking around our interest won't fly. That day is done. If you refuse to answer the questions, then you get dropped, plain and simple. We made a lot of noise for our tangibles, and black people, especially young black people, are listening. And the white media slowly but surely is having to reckon with this reality. We got more black folks jumping on board this message every day, and it's got the white supremacists and their non-white allies shook. These white media and black bootlick operated outlets, they understand that they have to pay lip service to the things that we say, but in the political environment that we have created, lip service won't do. Because no matter what the white media is trying to put forward that we should feel sorry for Joe Biden, and well, he's trying his best, give me a break. Because we do not give a damn about rehabilitating or redeeming some geriatric racist. Joe Biden is every bit as much a racist as Donald Trump. He's been on a lifelong anti-black jihad. He was too stupid to change when he was a young man, and he's too old and useless to change now, so we ain't gonna waste time trying. He should be punished for his mountain of crimes against the former slaves who built this country. And it's a perverted joke for him to talk about what America's done for black people without mentioning his own 50-year track record of pushing the most reprehensible legislation and policies against us. And Kamala Harris deciding that she's not going to confess to anything. The more she refuses to confess, the more obvious it becomes. So family, we've got to stay on our square and keep beating the drum and doing our part. The work that we are doing is having an impact. But this is not about whether or not some racist Republican or racist Democrat becomes president. We're done allowing the white media with their black bootlicks to sucker us into the same old game of, do you prefer full-flavored white supremacy or diet white supremacy? We're not playing that game. We're not choosing between the lesser of two evils. We are saying what is going to have to be on the ballot in order for us to engage. Because just because you don't have us at the polls doesn't mean we're not going to be pushing for change. They've already seen how that looks. So that being the case, this is going to be the new normal. But we got to stay on our square. You've got to help spread the message and make sure that black people understand. You are the ones who are going to change the world. You've already forced the white media to have to change their headlines.